tensions rising after what can only be described as this blockbuster testimony from a diplomat detailing the Trump bribery plot with Ukraine. Bill Taylor, a name now echoing around the nation, served presidents in both parties, and he went to Congress and he drew this direct line between Trump and the scheme to deny military aid to Ukraine in exchange for a probe of Donald Trump's rivals. The reverberations are continuing, mounting evidence teeing up, quote, a very dark moment for the Trump White House. That's the view, not from Democrats or critics, but rather a source close to Mitch McConnell. Now, how dark is this storm rolling in after that testimony and as this evidence accrues? Well, here's a rule of thumb in Washington. If you think the news helps you, you lean into it. If you think it hurts a little bit but is fundamentally debatable, well, you debate it. I mean, they're all politicians, right? But if you find that there's no real way to debate it or to rebut it or to spin it out loud, then run.
Any reaction to Bill Taylor's testimony yesterday? Do you think it's damaging for the president? Any reaction to Bill Taylor's testimony yesterday?
Well, I am almost late for my own hearing.
But the opening
I have to read it.
Any reaction to Bill Taylor's testimony yesterday?
I'm done.
There you have it. Today, that's how some Republican senators greeted just straightforward questions about Ambassador Taylor's testimony. Note, they didn't say he was wrong or he's part of a smear campaign or anything the White House was saying. They just let it be. And that may have actually been prudent, because when the news is rough, the only other thing we tend to see in politics, the other thing that people do besides just silently running away and letting it sit, well, is try to shut down the whole process. And that's the other headline. You're looking at a whole group organized of House Republicans who went to do something pretty unusual. They basically tried to protest or shut down or break the rules or do a direct action, whatever you want to call it, and that will be debated too. But they joined together to crash and stop the fact-finding deposition of a top Pentagon official.
By golly, if they're going to do it in public. We demand open proceedings. The American people deserve nothing less.
We're going to go and see if we can get inside. Let's see if we can get in.
Let's see if we can get in. I mean, we work here. We know the rules, but let's see what happens when we break our own rules. Now, the Trump allies that you see there from Congress tried to storm the hearing, and they actually used force effectively to overwhelm what is a secure location. As you probably know if you watch the news, this is done in a very particular way when it involves intelligence. It's a closed-door meeting in a classified, protected room. And what you got today was basically Republicans trying to block their own branch of government's work momentarily to try to block the gathering of evidence. Now, under the rules, only the members of the actual relevant committees are allowed in. Now, those other Republican officials you saw, they barged in anyway, and some broke a wholly additional security rule because they brought in their phones, which you can't do. Others tried to make a mockery of their own house by ordering pizza and Chick-fil-A sandwiches. This is how we live now. But this is, of course, a momentary maneuver. It's a desperate gasp of a day. It doesn't change or stop the obvious lawful impeachment probe. Now, I do want to mention something because we always try to get all of it in here, all the facts. There are Republicans who argue that the hearing should be open. And there may be merits to that argument. But they don't get to make that call in the current Congress because the United States House is run by the party that won more seats. And many sensitive topics, we should mention, are also covered in closed hearings. And the Republicans doing this stunt today, most of them know that because when they ran these similar committees, when they were in charge, they also had secure private hearings. Now, what did these same members say about the substance of Ambassador Taylor's testimony that's clearly upended so much that led to this direct action, if you want to call it that? Well, here was one of the very Republican protest leaders today who led this whole thing, actually confronted by reporters asking about the testimony.
Mr. Brooks, the opening statement says very clearly, this is what Bill, hold on, let me finish what I'm saying. Let me finish my question. He says very clearly.
You should not be relying on it.
I'm asking about the substance of what he said. He said that.
That doesn't make any difference. We don't know whether what he said is true or not.
I turn now to Maya Wiley, former counsel to the mayor of New York City and a prosecutor at SDNY, Matt Miller, who served at DOJ, and Juanita Tolliver from the campaign Center for American Progress Action Fund. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to start with Matt because you've dealt with some of these committees under both parties' control. What do you think is the significance of Ambassador Taylor setting off something so lethal yesterday that we showed the senators not wanting to address it at all, the president distracting with his racial incendiary remarks, which we covered briefly on the show last night, and this spectacle today?
Look, I think what happened today was a direct reaction to Ambassador Taylor's testimony yesterday. The testimony that he came and gave is the kind of testimony that ultimately can be fatal to the president. It was the last piece of the puzzle. We've already seen direct evidence of the abuse of power pressuring the Ukrainian government. We'd already seen direct evidence of the cover-up. This was the final piece, direct evidence that the president had withheld security assistance to get these investigations launched into his campaign. And I think that's why you saw the reaction you saw today from the House. They knew they couldn't really handle another day like yesterday. They couldn't have another witness come up and give testimony, potentially, locking the president into a huge abuse of power.
Are you saying they can't handle the truth, Matt?
Yeah,
I feel like you got very close to saying that.
Basically, I'm not going to rip off a movie, but that's the point. So no, look, I think they had two goals today. One, they were trying to shut down the witness who was coming to testify, an official from the Department of Defense who was there to testify about the security assistance being withheld and whether she knew why that happened. And two, they needed a distraction for the media. They don't really care what's reported on MSNBC. They don't really care what's reported on other networks, but they need to throw some red meat out to Fox News so Fox has something to cover, because otherwise, what do they have to talk about? They can't really cover Taylor's testimony. There's nothing good there. And so they needed a little bit of a distraction, because what's really happening in the Republican Party is not what's happening in the House is not what's important. What you showed in the Senate is the real problem for the president right now. A lot of senators who saw what happened yesterday and are very, very concerned and aren't willing to go out and defend it the way the members in the House are. Yeah, and as we showed, and we'll show any comments we get, Juanita, but several of those Republican senators facing Mr. Taylor, military guy, West Point grad, lifelong public servant, both parties, yada, yada, they didn't really have the appetite to say, even, not sure if I believe him, I believe my president over the ambassador. That's a position one could take. They didn't even say that, Juanita.
Because he is a dedicated public servant who clearly works above the board. Everything in his opening statement was probably based on meticulous notes. He laid out receipts. He named names. He listed dates. And he methodically walked through a process in which Trump and his administration worked to essentially extort Ukraine in order to investigate his political opponents for his own personal gain. I think the other thing of note here in the display we saw in the House today by those GOP members was the fact that they were also performing for Trump. This is something that Trump was looking for. He wanted to make sure he had a strong showing of members of his party going out and prioritizing him over the needs of Americans, over the needs of our democracy, over the needs of our country. And so they were playing to Trump more than anybody else here, even though tomorrow we're still going to be talking about Taylor, and we're still going to be talking about the damning messages that are coming from this testimony that cannot be explained away by any member of the GOP.
Right. And Maya, a lot of this is moving fast. I don't think the Democrats have settled on one clear and single impeachment rationale. And I actually have something on that later this show. But the Republicans clearly struggling to decide, what do they want to make this about? Do they want to concede that some shady stuff happened, but it's not impeachable? That was Mulvaney's first response, Mulvaney 1.0, which turned into Mulvaney 2.0, pay no attention to Mulvaney from earlier in the day. Do they want to do this process attack, which of course lawyers and people do, process, or do they want to say something substantively about the underlying facts? And I want to point to you to the former Attorney General of the United States, whose job isn't really supposed to be about defending the president, but here's the claim he's trotting out on Fox News. Take a look.
I'm a former prosecutor, and what I know is this is a perfect time for a preliminary hearing where you would say, show us your evidence. What evidence of a crime do you have? I mean, the Constitution, sort of abuse of power is not a crime.
Well, I don't even know where to start, because first of all, the Constitution and the impeachment process is also not about crime, meaning, of course, you can be impeached for abuse of your power. That's one of the things that the founders explicitly discussed. In fact, when they took high crimes and misdemeanors from the law of the crown, it was clearly understood that you would impeach someone for abuse of power or just not doing their job. You could actually impeach in the UK under that scenario. But I think more importantly here is the suggestion, which is similar to the process claims we were seeing in the civil disobedience, if we want to call it that, today in Congress.
And I don't know that I do. I just threw it out there as an option.
I'm being kind.
Can you civilly disobey when you're in charge of the civil process?
Are you civilly disobeying when in a process about national security, you actually undermine the national security of the country?
These
Not
are
something we typically do.
This is somewhere where political strategy is meeting like an M.C. Escher painting. But please go on.
Well, at root in both of these arguments is, because let's take it to its logical extension. We're not at preliminary hearing stage, because preliminary hearing stage means you've gathered enough evidence that you can start to talk about what you're going to prove. What the Democrats have been saying all along, which I think is true on the process, is we're inquiring right now. You don't get to go to the FBI when they're investigating a crime and say, I get to sit in on all your witness interviews and I get to cross-examine your witnesses while you're interviewing them before you've even decided whether you're charging them with anything. Well, and that's essentially what's happening.
It's a great point, and you're reminding us of something that is good to keep in mind as we follow this process, which is under the Constitution, if there is a potential high crime, abuse of power, bribery, treason, it is the House that investigates and charges and the Senate that tries. And what you're referring to is the fact that the House is doing that investigation side. And Matt, as we explore the range of defenses, I also want to play someone who is very influential in the White House. You mentioned ginning some of this up for different audiences. Here's Sean Hannity on a potential defense for President Trump.
And the president said, I'd like you to do us a favor. Okay, well, it's a favor. Okay, there were no strings attached. Zero quid pro quo. And let's be clear. The term do us a favor, well, we all have go-to phrases. I'll say a lot. The president uses them all the time. Kind of a verbal aside. So to recap, the term do me a favor, that's a phrase the president uses. We've identified hundreds of times.
These are the guys that are supposed to be helping him. I mean, really, it is amazing to watch the arguments they're rolling out. Before I talk about him, I want to say something about Matt Whitaker first. It is incredible to me, as it probably is to as a veteran of the Justice Department, for it still to be true that man was the Attorney General of the United States, held the job that was once held by giants like Robert Kennedy and Elliot Richardson. It blows my mind still to this day. But look, I think you see these arguments from Matt Whitaker and from Sean Hannity because they really are left with nothing else. I mean, you've seen them have to retreat from every argument. They started with the idea that, no, look, there was no pressure at all, and they've had to retreat from that. Then they moved to there was no quid pro quo, and then they had to retreat. I think are going to have to retreat from that. They're still trying to pretend like there wasn't, but that's not going to hold up for very long. So they're left, kind of attacking the process and left with these ideas that, it's not a quid pro quo if you don't use the magic words. Like if I came up to you, Ari, and said, I don't want to buy any drugs, but here's a bag of cash and give me that cocaine. That's not a drug deal because I said I'm not doing it. They're just kind of falling back on nonsense over and over again. And I think it does get to the problem they're going to have. They can get through the House with this because a lot of the members of the House are silly people, and they can get through with silly arguments. But when they get to the Senate, those members are going to have to vote, and they're going to have to decide whether they're going to take these nonsense arguments from the White House and defend propositions that are really indefensible to the American public, or whether they are going to come back, whether the White House is going to give them something else to work with, something factual, or I think ultimately the only defense is the one that you laid out at the beginning, which was, yes, it was bad the president did this, but it's not impeachable. But they're not there yet.
They're not there, and they have the shadow chief of staff, according to some reporting, Sean Hannity, disagreeing with the actual chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, because they're on the opposite sides of whether this was conditioned on the probe. So it's a lot of a mess. I got to finish a break because we have so much tonight. My special thanks to Matt, Juanita, and Maya Wiley. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.